resident of Dedham and practice within Dedham as well in greater Massachusetts area.
Good, good. Do you currently have an office in Dedham or
Yeah, I'm located, I live and work out of Dedham, yes.
no, so home office, right? I think so, right? I think
Yeah,
that's
I mean, I have conference space as needed, but I also have a couple little ones, so we've sort of adapted here with the times to spend as much time here at home as possible with the kids.
yeah. I'm actually at my home right now. I'm at my home office right now. Actually, this is actually my kids' piano room as well. So this is time to do it. So I'm going to
Perfect
ask you a few
timing.
questions about real estate. So what is a real estate attorney? What does a real estate attorney do actually? If I do hire one.
So primarily real estate attorneys are attorneys that specialize in the laws and the regulations that surround the transfer of property. Okay. And that could involve anything from researching zoning matters to negotiating purchase and sale agreements. Um, it could involve property title examinations, but it's somewhere within that realm usually.
Okay.
And
Um,
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was saying, so it could be a lot of research involved in it for depending on the task at hand. But I guess one of the things I've always thought of it as, for an analogy, is sort of as a quarterback, if you will, for a football team in
Mhm.
terms of the transaction itself. We try to hold everybody accountable, make sure everybody's on the same page for your transaction, and ensure that it gets done on time as smooth as possible, that everybody's on the same page.
So do you
Sounds
think
great.
like if you work for let's say you work for the seller, right? Do you think you do more work for the seller than the buyer, or is it equal amount of work? What do you think?
Well, for my practice, I feel like it's pretty evenly split between I work primarily in three areas with lenders, with buyers, and with sellers. Okay. And there is some overlap. Often I will work with a lender and the same buyer for a transaction,
Mhm.
but you're never going to be in all three at the same time. So you're never going to have the working with the buyer, the seller, and the bank at the same time. But I would say it's pretty evenly split between buyers and sellers myself.
Mhm. So do most buyers hire a real estate attorney and most sellers do? You think in this real estate world right now?
Well, they should. It's certainly it's a good practice too. I mean, a few reasons why you would want to, as a practical matter, purchasing a home for most of us is going to be by far the most expensive transaction that you ever find yourself in. I mean, it's usually going to dwarf anything else that you're involved in. In there, it is complicated. There are a lot of moving parts, and things can go sideways unexpectedly, often without a lot of warning.
Mhm.
So whether you're a buyer or a seller, it's really important to have somebody with expertise in the area that's dedicated to looking out for your interest and that can provide you sound guidance in the event of the unexpected.
Mhm.
Because as a buyer, especially, you've got a lot of money involved in your deposit. So you're going to want to make sure that that can be expected to the extent possible. You're also going to want to make sure that you're getting a good title to your property as a buyer, because if there are defects or clouds on the title, things that haven't been addressed or filed properly, you're going to find yourself with a headache that you've inherited down the road when you go to resell.
So I mean, what are like if I hire you as, let's say, I as a real estate attorney, like what are the fees like if I hire you as attorney?
I try to keep things
Range.
very straightforward and simple, whether it's a buyer or a seller. I
Mm-hmm.
think people like the certainty going into a transaction of knowing what you can expect to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, with that said, whether it's a buyer or a seller, my standard fee for representation is $12.75. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in most cases, that'll cover everything that's necessary to get us through the transaction into the closing table.
Mm-hmm.
um as a buyer, we are going to well, as a seller, I guess we should start there because they usually start the transactions from the paper end of things.
Mm-hmm.
We'll draft the initial purchase and sale agreement. We'll order any payoffs for mortgages or items that need to be paid for the seller. um we'll attend the sign the paperwork if need be, if the seller is unable to attend the closing.
Mhm.
And from the buyer's end of things, again, you're spending a lot of time explaining the process to the client, reviewing all the paperwork when it comes in with the title, and making sure that everything gets filed properly with the registry on that.
Do I mean, you charge a pretty, good amount, like fee 12.75. Does all attorneys, real estate attorney, charge around the same price range, you think, or a little bit more or less?
I feel like there's a range. I don't think you're gonna find anything under most cases that's gonna be, radically different, but I would say as a buyer or a seller, I would be far less concerned with the fees than the
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah, I
Um,
think so too.
it's more, in my mind, it's more important that you've really got a comfort level with the parties, all of them, not just the attorney, but everybody involved in your transaction, and that they're very responsive. I mean, in my mind, to save a few $100 doesn't really make a lot of sense if you don't feel like you're getting a good response from the people, and your sense is that you're just sort of another number or a file on a desk. You want to make sure that somebody's really in your corner, and they're crossing the T's and dotting the I's for you.
So anything like, usually a client would ask me, "Oh, how much are the real estate attorneys?" I usually just give them a range like between 1,200 to 1,500. Do you think that's a good range for?
Yeah, I mean, I think in and around $1,000, give or
Yeah, I
take.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In and around $1,000, give or take. I'd say there's sort of par for the course on it.
Mhm.
That seems to be what I see a lot out there.
Yeah, I don't because I don't want to be liable because then like, oh my God, Sherry said that it's gonna be 50. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm just giving you a price range and I don't want to be liable for it. It's like, oh Sherry, you said it was like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have the relationship, with the attorney to be able to, to quote them exactly what it's going to be. I would just tell them that,
This
it
is
can
the price
range.
range.
And yeah, it's gonna differ a little bit depending on the attorney and what services are included. Give them a call, and that's really a conversation I think to be had with
Yeah.
the
And
with the
then
client.
if you like, I know you work with different vendors, right? Like what vendors do you work for?
I mean, I've worked with very, very large national corporations from
So you're
like,
part of a network, right? So if someone uses like, I don't know, like let's say Bank of England, right? So Antoine also
yep.
was a earlier interviewer we interviewed. He said you work closely with him, right? As
Oh
well.
yeah, I've worked for many years,
Yeah.
certainly.
So I mean, as a prefer, like let's say you work, like let's say I get a mortgage to Bank of England, right?
Mhm.
How would my fees be less or like in terms of real estate? Is because that's all incorporated together, like right?
That's a good point. And what I try to do is I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. Okay. And during that time, I have a large network of people that I work with, for lenders, real estate agents, and so forth. So I guess to start with, I'm always happy to offer a referral to a trusted partner that I know is going to
Mhm,
put somebody in a good situation.
mhm,
And if we are working on both sides of the transaction, where I'm handling the closing as well as representing the party personally, we're,
mhm.
we're certainly going to do a discount for that. It's typically
Right.
about 50%, which
Oh,
is a
good.
good,
You
which
get
is a
like
good,
a
which
like a
is a
bundle situation.
yeah, which is a good value add for the client, that you've got, somebody that is going to be representing your interest personally in the transaction as well.
How many attorneys are usually involved in the whole process?
On a residential side, either two or three. I mean, you would have an attorney for the seller, and then an attorney potentially for the bank, and potentially an attorney for the buyer. Now, you may see a situation where the attorney that's doing the closing for the bank is also representing the seller's interest as well,
Okay.
because they have a similar goal, and they're both trying to get the financing accomplished, and get these people into the house. So that's pretty common where you'll have
I
a
think I've seen
dual
like
representation.
I think Andy actually closed on my brother-in-law's house where it was involved like a whole big family of like 5, 6 families. I don't know, remember on St. Margaret Street. It's like 5 families, right? So there were like 3, 4 attorneys, I think so that day. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
that's not the typical
No,
situation.
no, no.
No.
It was actually a very so Andy and I, we know each other for a long time. I refer business to him and he's done business for me as well. In that time, that transaction, was actually from my brother-in-law. He purchased a home where there were like 4, 5, 6 family members, and there were 4 or 5 attorneys involved. So that day was kind of like a zoo, actually, right? I was there with
Yeah.
my brother-in-law and you as well, Andy, and there were like 4 or 5 attorneys, I think, or whatever. I don't remember. It was like quite a few years ago, but that's not a typical transaction now. You know what I mean? But
No, the typical situation would be two or three.
you know, but with the pandemic now, right? You don't even have, like, the agents don't even have to go to the closing anymore. They don't want you to go. So it's like sign the paperwork and then you go, you know. Before it was like a
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get people to just drop stuff off, and then unless you're key and you're critical to the transaction, you know, it's really not worth it to
it's actually easy for me. It's like, okay, when I can pick up my check, that's it. You know, I
Yes.
usually go for moral support. You know what I mean? I guess for my clients, I'll hold a hand to the very end, to the closing. That's what I usually like to do. But now I don't even have to go. It's actually it's better for me, for me myself. You know?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's, unless something unexpected happens at the last minute, all the heavy lifting is done anyway. It's basically just let's sign the paperwork and the congratulations, right? At that
Exactly,
point.
exactly. So it's a good thing. You know what I mean? I think. I don't know. But yeah. So is there anything else Roberto, did I miss any questions that we want to ask Andy about attorney fees and so on?
No, actually, I think that pretty much covers it. It explains what an attorney does, what you need, and what the purpose is. And there's going to be one regardless, right? Like in any situation.
Yeah, you can't close a mortgage transaction in Massachusetts without having an attorney involved. So, especially if the difference in expense between just relying on, the bank attorney who is solely looking out for the bank as opposed to hiring someone, specifically to represent your interest isn't going to be great. In my mind, again, it's really a no-brainer to have somebody in your corner.
What would be like a worst case scenario? Like if you didn't get your own attorney and everything else just played out, you just let it play out.
Well, I mean, as a buyer, you have, again, tens of thousands of dollars in most of these situations at risk for your deposit money. So if you don't have somebody that's looking out for your interest, you got to be very careful about your contingencies, especially your mortgage. If your financing's not all set or in place by the date that it's supposed to be, and that date just kind of comes and goes, and then there's a problem at the last minute, then the seller may have a legitimate claim to keep the deposit money, which no buyer's going to want to, deal with. So by having somebody in your corner, we track those dates and we follow up to make sure that the bank issues the commitment letters. Again, this is part of the quarterbacking. Issue what needs to be issued in the time that it's to be issued, and then review it to make sure that there's not going to be any surprises, that they have a good commitment from the bank and that they're solid on their financing.
That's great.
So
this is the money that you don't want to save. I mean, always hire a good attorney, just like Andy.
Yeah, exactly.
To protect you.
Like,
Yeah.
you don't want to be cheap here.
You don't want to lose
No,
that deposit because it's like $20,000-$30,000 right there. You don't want to lose that, and the dates are very,
the dates are critical. The
yeah,
dates
it's very critical
dates are
because
critical.
yeah, you
I
don't
mean,
want to miss those dates.
If we need to extend the dates and there are things that arise unexpectedly, I mean, you can deal with that as long as you're on top of it. You go through the proper channels and you notify people in the way that you should. If it's just kind of one of those things that, somebody's not working with an attorney and it falls between the cracks, then you're going to find yourself in a very difficult position.
Yeah, it's a 20, 30 grand mistake. You'll remember it.
Yeah.
Of course. So I always want to ask this question to a real estate attorney, Andy. I know you might be the right person to ask. Like, have you ever had a buyer bring a suitcase of money for closing?
I have not.
Have you heard?
I think this is an urban legend, maybe at this point. I've heard stories from colleagues of situations.
I always want to ask that question, but I never did. I was like, I should ask someone about this because
I've not had the suitcase or the duffel bag brought in yet.
Right.
But I think I'd be in a